What's up guys, and thank you for stopping by the channel. Today's project is this Echo GT200R string trimmer. And the problem is that it will start, but it won't stay running. Let's see if we can figure out what's wrong with it and hopefully fix it. I'm not sure how you feel about Echo equipment, but I think they're pretty decent. They've got plenty of power, and the best part is that they're not too heavy, so they're easy to use. This is an older model, and it's an entry-level one at that, but it looks like it wasn't used very much. More than likely, though, the problems it was having pretty much sidelined it, so of course it looks very pristine. First, let's pull on the rope a little bit, and make sure that we can feel that the engine has compression. And as you can see, there's a good amount of resistance coming from the engine, so we should have enough compression for it to start. Now we do know some of the history about this trimmer, that it starts but it doesn't stay running. However, if you don't know anything about yours, then let's troubleshoot this step by step. First, let's try putting some fuel into the throat of the carburetor and try pulling it over and see if it starts. Now the air filter is kind of dirty, however it's not bad enough to keep it from running. We'll have to replace it later on if we get this trimmer running the way it's supposed to. Well, it runs and sounds pretty good, so let's move on. Now, if yours doesn't run, you'll need to check to see if you have spark and possibly do a compression test to find out if it has enough to start. And since ours did run, let's put some gas into the fuel tank and see the problem for ourselves. Now, when pressing the primer bulb, make sure it fills up with fuel, otherwise it won't start. If yours doesn't fill up, then you might have a serious carburetor problem. As you can see, it doesn't want to stay running even after moving the choke lever in different positions. Let's increase the idle speed and see if it stays running. And after increasing the idle, the engine speed was very erratic. We're definitely going to have to get to the carburetor and inspect it. After removing the air filter base, disconnect the fuel lines and the throttle cable from the carburetor. Before taking the carburetor apart, I'm going to confirm which port is the return line by pressing the primer bulb and watching for which port the fuel comes out of. If yours never filled up with fuel, then you can skip this part. Now let's take apart the primer bulb side of the carburetor first. This side of the carburetor is responsible for pulling fuel from the tank and into the carburetor. Now I'm sure the diaphragm on the side will look okay since the primer was working and the trimmer was starting. So take a look at the two check valve flaps and make sure that they are flat, just like the rest of the diaphragm. If yours are not flat, then you might need a rebuilt kit. If we need to adjust the fuel mixtures, there are some hidden screws. This is one of the adjustment screws. It's covered by a plastic plug that we need to remove. There is another screw in the middle of the brass pivot shaft, and unfortunately it has a brass plug covering it. Let's just remove the plastic plug first because it's harder to get to this one later on. So what I'm going to do is heat up a drill bit with a cigarette lighter. Now I could use a propane torch, but I wanted to show you that you don't need one. And once the tip is red hot, stick the drill bit into the plastic cap and give about a quarter turn. Now let it cool down for several seconds and then pull the cap off. Now you can see the tiny flathead adjusting screw that was underneath the plastic cap. We'll turn it later when we get the trimmer running again. Now that we've uncovered the screw head and inspected the pumping diaphragm, let's put this side of the carburetor back together again. It's now time to take the plate covering the metering diaphragm off so we can inspect the diaphragm. This is usually the reason why most two-cycle equipment have problems. Well, would you look at that? The metering diaphragm is completely petrified, and that's why it won't stay running. It's supposed to be flexible so it can supply fuel at varying engine speeds, but it can't do that when it's rock hard. Just listen to the noises it's making. It's not supposed to be like this at all. Now, if we compare it to a new one, it's supposed to be like a cotton t-shirt, very flexible. If yours is not rock hard, but it's not brand new either, then the trimmer will either have some starting issues or run under certain loads only. However, you can make carburetor adjustments to compensate for this issue though. Let's replace the diaphragm and put the carburetor back together again, and then reinstall it onto the engine. I would suggest installing the throttle cable to the carburetor first, as it's a lot easier this way than doing the fuel lines. And after installing the cable, reconnect the fuel lines and then replace the air filter base and the carburetor to the engine. And once everything is back on the engine, prime the fuel system and let's try starting it once again. And just like usual, I'm going to do as little editing as possible on the startup to show you what really happened. Well, it still wants to die, so let's try increasing the engine idle speed and see if anything changes. So increasing the engine speed at idle didn't do much, but I'm not going to give up, so let's try starting it one more time. Well, unfortunately, it still died, so we need to remove the brass plug to adjust the L screw to idle properly. Unfortunately, the plastic plug we removed earlier was for wide open throttle only. I'm going to turn the screw about a quarter turn counterclockwise to increase the fuel at idle. Now let's try starting it once again. Well, it seems to run just fine after turning the idle back down. The carburetor might need further adjustment after another cold start, but it should only be a slight one. If you're uncomfortable going through the carburetor, then I would suggest buying a new one. The replacement carb may also have the fuel mixture screws uncovered, so making adjustments will be much easier. So my question to you is, would you buy a whole new carburetor or just the metering diaphragm? A carburetor could cost anywhere between $10 to $15, while the metering diaphragm is $1. I'm interested in hearing what you have to say. Thank you for watching. I really appreciate your time. Please feel free to ask any questions, and I hope to see you in my next video.